When I was 23, my parents and grandmother were killed in a car accident on Christmas Eve. I don't talk about this part of my life very often, primarily because I never wanted to be defined by my tragedy. But I think also because I never wanted to develop a platform from a moment of grief. I know telling these stories are important and they help people, but I've just seen so many times where somebody capitalizes on a moment of tragedy and builds a platform from it. And so I just never wanted to do that, and hence I just don't talk about it very often. But every once in a while, the Lord puts it on my heart to share, and today is one of those days. Now, when you experience something like this, it's like passing through a veil where suddenly you are on the other side of a reality that nobody else can join you in that hasn't been through either the same thing or something very similar. All tragedy, all grief has different complexions. Like losing a wife is different than losing a child, is different than losing a parent. But some of these things have enough similarity that those who have passed through that veil, they can relate in a way that no one else can. I think that's probably the hardest part, is realizing that you're suddenly in a reality separate from everyone else, and the people who desperately want to comfort you, who want to make you feel better, they lack the relatability and the understanding of the experience to be able to join you there, and so it can feel tremendously isolating. And the other thing that I learned in this was that grief is very different than sadness. And sadness is it's like a bruise on the bone. You brush against a memory or a moment, and it hurts. It sends a twinge of pain through the body. But grief is something altogether different. Unlike hurt and sadness, which are on the inside, grief is on the outside. It's like being thrown into an ocean with no life preserver and no land in sight. Literally every moment of your life becomes a series of endurances. And getting out of bed feels like climbing a mountain. Talking to anybody feels like giving a TED Talk. It's this oppressive weight, and you spend most days feeling like you're just fighting for air. Now, where my story diverges from a lot of people is the moment I got the call, I had a vision, and that vision shaped the entire experience that I had. And so I want to share that with you, and some of the things that the Lord showed me through that vision, in hopes that maybe if you're somebody who's dealing with grief, this could be helpful to you as well. So when I got the call from my brother, I was actually in another state at the time. And I remember thinking that he was just telling a bad joke. I was waiting for the punchline, and then the punchline didn't come, and suddenly this new reality began to settle in a way that there was no place for it to settle. You don't have context for these things when they happen. It's like these are things that you see on the news, they happen to other people, you hear about it, but you never really think that it could happen to you until it does. And so as I was standing there in my office, it was like in a movie. If you've ever seen the movie Inception, where they're in the dream state, I think in the practice realm, and everything starts exploding around them, and then it just stops and freezes in midair. That's what it felt like. It was like my entire life just exploded, and all of the happy memories and hopes and dreams were shattered into shrapnel and were just surrounding me. And so the life that I once cherished and the life that I looked forward to became the very thing that threatened my life in that moment. But before the impact, it was like God just froze the shattered remains of my life around me. And as I stood there, sort of bewildered and staring at them, it was as though two paths were presented before me. It was certainly a vision. It wasn't as though two portals opened up in my office or anything, but at the same time, it was more than a metaphor. It was a choice. And to my left, there was this abyss. All I could see was darkness and a pit that seemed to just go on forever. But yet in this pit, it was comforting. It called to me. The thing about it was it had a sort of a dark comfort to it, because in this pit were all of my anger, all of my hurt, all of my wounding was validated. It was as though from the pit I could hear it saying, everything that you feel is right. All of your anger towards God is righteous. Your questions are valid. Everything that you feel in this moment is valid. The second path was just like a Sunday afternoon driving home from church or the grocery store, and it's that experience that I remembered as a kid, when we would drive under the tree cover and the sun would sort of pierce through the leaves on occasion, and so there was both shade and light, but it was just this sort of lazy feeling that you got when you were a kid, just driving on a Sunday afternoon. Now, the path to the right didn't offer anything in particular. It didn't offer comfort or hope or peace or really much of anything. It just seemed as though it was like a continuation of life, if you will. And so as I stood there looking at these two paths, I just felt something well up in me, and I almost embarrassingly now, looking back on it, but I just sort of blurted out, God, this doesn't change anything between you and I. We're good. And in the moment, really what I was trying to express is that this tragedy, this thing that's befallen me, this is not going to change my relationship or my belief. Like, Lord, I've come with you this far. This will not be the thing that makes me turn. And as soon as the words left my mouth, the abyss sort of closed up on itself, and the path to my right, the Sunday afternoon, sort of expanded until it just merged into my office. And then it was over. I was just standing there back in my office as though I'd never left. Not really sure what to think, to be completely honest. I didn't go home immediately. I had a couple of hours left, and so I just finished up work, and then I went to a close friend's house, and we were there waiting to hear if my mom was going to make it. My dad and my grandmother were killed on the scene, and my mom made it to the hospital. I remember having a moment where I felt like I was able to communicate with my parents, and I just remember in that moment in my heart, I told my mom to go, because I didn't want her to have to come back to the loss of a husband and the loss of her mother. As much as I didn't want to lose her, I just didn't want her to have to face that pain. And I'm not saying it had anything to do with me, but I just remember it wasn't long after kind of releasing her and telling her to go that she went. So after getting sort of through the evening, I went home, I sat on my bed, and I remember that shrapnel from my life being blown apart. It's like the best I can describe is like that vision never left. It was as though it was still frozen in time, but it was with me through the entire evening. And finally, as I was sitting on my bed, I felt like the Lord spoke to me and he said, "Are you ready?" And I knew what he meant. He had paused the impact of the moment so that I could see clearly to make a decision about how I was going to respond to this tragedy and to this grief. But that doesn't mean that we get to escape the moment itself. And so as I sat there on my bed and he asked if I was ready, I said yes. And it was as though 1,000 shards of glass just penetrated my soul. It took me some time to fully process everything that happened. But one day I asked the Lord, it was quite a few years later, but I asked him what the two paths were, because I finally got to a place where I felt like I could begin to process that grief and understand and just understand what happened that night. And what he told me was that what I was seeing was a relationship with grief versus a relationship with Jesus. A relationship with grief, it validates your anger, it validates your wounding, but it's a trade. You exchange the comfort for feeling validated about all of the hurt that you feel. But that exchange comes with having to believe the lies that grief will tell you about your life. You see, grief will tell you that every Christmas is now ruined. Not just this one. Grief will tell you that you'll never be the same, that your life is irreparably damaged, and you'll have to carry that damage with you for the rest of your life. And every time you draw comfort from the validation that grief brings, you simultaneously exchange a part of your future for that comfort. You see, what grief will do is it will take every hope that you had for relationships and for events, and it will literally turn every celebration into a series of funerals. When you have children, grief will tell you that your parents will never see your children's first step, and so it turns their birth into a reminder of the death and loss that you've experienced. It will cover every celebration where the person that you've lost is missed into a reason to grieve. And once grief has stolen your future, it will then begin to poison every memory that you have of the person that you loved until you wish that they had never existed in the first place, so that you would be spared your pain. But grief is a liar. And that's what I saw that night. I was given the opportunity to see a relationship with grief and a relationship with Jesus. And the difference between a relationship with grief and a relationship with Jesus is that grief will comfort you about the fact that you're drowning. But Jesus will knock you out and drag you to shore. Grief will tell you the things that make you feel validated in your pain. But Jesus will tell you the truths that will allow you to rise above it. Grief will tell you that your parent or your loved one will never see your children's first steps on earth. But Jesus will tell you that they will see their first steps in heaven. It was not a quick or easy recovery. When you experience something like this, it literally cracks the well of your soul. And that is not something that can be repaired. It can only be filled. And what you fill it with determines your future. I know for me, for a long time, I didn't let my wife drive. I masked it with responsibility and vigilance, but truthfully it was fear. But that wasn't for my whole life. That was for a time. And because I chose not to have a relationship with grief, because I rejected that relationship, every Christmas is not ruined. We began celebrating Christmas again the next year, and we've celebrated it ever since. After about 5 years, the Lord brought to my attention that I wasn't letting my wife drive because I was afraid, and I needed to face that, and I needed to address it. And I wanted to argue. I wanted to be validated, but that validation costs your soul. And so Jesus told me the truth, that I was just afraid, and that I had to learn to trust him, that either he would protect my family or he would be enough to heal me and allow me to endure it if I were to lose them. And these are not easy truths. They're not easy things to accept, but they are the things that keep you free, because grief is a bondage. It will own your soul if you let it.